We now are going to move on to the next component of this session about driving innovation through research. And we're honored to have Dr. Matt McMahon from the NIH speak to us in our next session. He's director of the Small Business Education and Entrepreneurial Development Office, so the SEED office, to be brief about it. He leads this newly formed office, and its purpose is to accelerate NIH-funded biomedical innovations to commercialization. So bench to bedside is the focus. They have more than $1 billion that they spend annually in this portfolio and are supporting more than 1,500 life science companies within this portfolio. He has a background in academia. He was trained actually as a retinal specialist within his PhD function and form. So his first business opportunity was actually in developing a bionic eye. And then he was brought into congressional policy, both with the Senate and the Congress, House of Representatives. And NIH was very fortunate to be able to bring him on as in program development and management at a fairly early stage. So I'd like to invite Dr. McMahon to come to the podium and speak to us and share with us what you are doing now with NIH to stimulate research going to commercialization.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Thanks, it's really a pleasure and an honor to be here representing NIH. I have to tell you, I was talking to my wife and I told her I think I drew the short straw getting the spot before lunch, but it's much worse than that because not only do I have the spot before lunch, but I have to follow a panel of Nobel laureates, to which my 5-year-old daughter replied, "What's the problem? Mom says all you do is talk for a job anyway." So I decided that my goal here is to try and convince you that NIH is not all talk when it comes to the activities that we're doing here to take these innovations from the bench to the bedside. So I modified the title of my talk a little bit to reflect that and recognition of the topic of the conference, but most people in the room already know that NIH is the premier biomedical research funding agency, and in fact, our budget this year is going to be $41 billion. So that's a huge investment in biomedical research. But does anybody know what the tagline for NIH is? I know Rod Pettigrew knows what the tagline for NIH is. So the tagline is turning discovery into health. So our mission is not just to fund basic science research, but to strengthen the conversion of that research into medical therapies that can really improve medical practice and patient care. But also in line with a lot of the discussions about investment that have happened in this meeting, I actually consider my job, and I consider NIH to be an investor. We're an investor. It's just that the metrics of success for our investments are economic and healthcare impact. So we have a responsibility not just to fund basic science research, but to really make sure that those investments are paying dividends for the citizens of our country who are funding our activities. So today I'm going to talk to you about NIH's efforts to create a comprehensive ecosystem that really helps make that happen. And there's really 3 kind of operational components of that. The first one is helping innovators really recognize and validate the commercial potential of their discoveries that they're making in the laboratory. So that's the first part. The second part is helping those innovators strengthen and de-risk those projects as early stage product development projects. And then the third part is to help them transition those projects into the private sector where they can continue their growth toward patient access. So those are kind of the operational goals of what we're trying to accomplish. So the NIH has coordinated these efforts and raised the status of these efforts through the creation of a new office. And you heard the name of this office before. It's called the SEED office. And even though I hate acronyms, I kind of like the name of this office because It is an acronym that means something, small business education and entrepreneurial development, but it also works as a word because that seed stage is really the space where we're working. And investors and large strategic partners, they recognize that because they recognize the seed stage is this spot in between the laboratory discovery and usually the place where these products and services have human data, clinical data supporting their safety and effectiveness. And that's kind of squarely in the space where we're working. So the name of the office is really an effective way to embody what we're trying to accomplish. So our group is coordinating the activities in these areas across all 24 institutes and centers of NIH that fund extramural research. So many people in the room realize that NIH is a very kind of siloed organization where these 24 institutes and centers all have their own strategic priorities, they all make their own funding decisions, they all have their own budgets. But what we're trying to do is really bring some uniformity and some coordination to the types of activities that we're trying to support. And our group also runs pilot programs and tests out new approaches that can be useful. And when we find approaches that work, we want to scale them up and make them available to innovators that are supported by all of the different NIH institutes, not just the ones that they are used to being funded by. So our activities really span 3 overlapping areas of interest in the early product development pipeline, and they're listed here. So what I'm going to do for the rest of the talk is I'll describe the activities that we have going on in each one of these areas and talk about how they interact. And also, while I'm doing that, I also want to talk about some of the broader goals that we're trying to accomplish. But certainly, in line with some of the discussion from Andrea Bells, my colleague from NSF, she really set the stage for a lot of the things I'm going to talk about. And certainly one of the important components that she set the stage for is the diversity component. So we are really committed at NIH to increasing the diversity of the biomedical workforce. And that encompasses a whole range of activities. It encompasses women and underrepresented minorities, which were mandated by law to increase participation by those groups in the small business program. But I also think about that as increasing the geographical diversity of what we fund and what we support at NIH, and also just the diversity of the types of people that are involved in the work that we support. So there was some discussion about physician scientists, and physician scientists have gotten a lot of attention throughout the years, but we're also thinking about physician entrepreneurs and scientist entrepreneurs, and there are many different skill sets that we're trying to bring to the table, and we really feel like having a diverse biomedical workforce that encompasses many different types of people and many different types of perspectives is really the most powerful way to accomplish our objectives. So the goal of academic innovation component is really to get the innovation out of the laboratory. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to help innovators convert their science projects into product development projects. It's pretty simple, the concept, but it's a huge transition. And many people that work as basic science researchers realize that that jump involves a lot of different steps and oftentimes completely different language and terminology and different types of activities. And we want to really facilitate that. So in 2013, NIH started an experiment to address the major barriers that prevent that transition from happening. And part of that, the way that we tried to approach this was by strengthening local ecosystems. And so we began a pilot project to form a network of proof of concept centers. And those proof of concept centers were addressing a number of well-established barriers in that process. So the first one is providing funding for projects to do the kind of early stage product development work that is not hypothesis-driven science, the kind of work that if you submit your R01 to do this, I think you have a pretty good idea of what's going to happen. and it's not going to result in you working on those projects. So we wanted to provide dedicated funding. But there's another piece of that. When we set up these centers, we required matching funds to come into those centers together with our funding. And we did that to strengthen those local ecosystems. And so those matching funds were coming from sometimes state funding, local economic development agencies, or oftentimes the universities themselves. So the project funding is an important piece, but that matching funding is equally important because it brings additional players to the table who not only increase and leverage our investments, but also help build the collaborations that are going to be necessary to be successful. The second part is a real focus on industry-style project management, so milestone-driven projects that really are setting investigators up to understand the types of activities that they're going to need to complete to develop a successful project, and tying that to coaching by industry experience mentors. The third piece is personalized feedback on the projects, and we set up a network of collaborators from our sister agencies. So we have representatives from NSF, the FDA, the Patent Office, the Center for Medicaid and Medicare Services, and we even have a private payer, Kaiser Permanente, involved. And so every individual R&D project that comes into one of these centers for funding, applies for funding, gets personalized feedback from that team. And then the third piece is really important. It's the entrepreneurial training and resources. So that's really helping people and providing them with the types of training that they will need to understand all the steps in this process. So the network started with 3 centers, one based in the Boston area, one based in the Cleveland Clinic, and one that was composed of all the medical schools in the UC system. And then that was expanded based on congressional authority to fund 3 new hubs called the Research, Evaluation, and Commercialization Hubs. And they were in Kentucky, Minnesota, and Long Island. And then, partly based on the success of that network, we wanted to really increase the geographical diversity and increase the training resources that were available. So the National Institute of General Medical Sciences funded 4 new hubs, and those hubs provide the types of educational training and support in these areas across the IDEA states. And many of you might know that the IDEA states are states that traditionally receive a smaller share of NIH funding, kind of underrepresented states. So that was last year. And then, based on the success of this network, Congress reauthorized us to fund 5 more research, evaluation, and commercialization hubs. And they were just recently awarded in late September. And those hubs are centered in Missouri, University of Washington, Kentucky, and Rutgers. And they are really adding to our network. So now this network that we've built over the years is employing these best practices that we've developed and includes 92 research institutions. So if you are an investigator at any one of those 92 institutions, you have access to the types of resources that I described, and they're covering 34 states and Puerto Rico. So we've really expanded the network, and over the years, so far, we've supported 277 research and development projects within this network. And over 2,000 innovators have received training through the various training programs in the network. So we really feel like this network is having a broad impact and helping innovators understand what they need to do to make that transition and really helping them to do that. And a testament to the success of the network is that those projects that have been funded with up to $200,000 each, those projects, one of their goals, of course, is to receive follow-on funding from other sources to continue the research. And if you add up the follow-on funding that those projects have received, it's over $700 million from various sources. And if you look at just the private sector investment in those projects, so this is from strategic partners, venture capitalists, angel investors, the amount of money that they've received is 13 times greater than the NIH investment in this entire network. So we think that that's a really important metric of success, because we're trying to build up these projects and prepare them for handoffs to the private sector, and we think that that metric is a very clear description that that's working. We also have 66 startup companies that have been formed, and those startup companies have submitted 50 SBIR applications, and the success rate of those applications is 3 times higher than the success rate for the overall portfolio for new applications. So we're really teaching people how to come in with strong applications to the program. And that's actually one of the major goals of this network, is to strengthen that pipeline into the small business program. So that's a good segue into the next part of my talk. So you heard a little bit from Andrea about NSF's small business program, and many of you are familiar with the small business program. At NIH, that program is over $1 billion a year. So it's funded by a 3.65% set aside of our research and development budget, but it's $1 billion a year. It's the biggest NIH program, actually. And it's completely free money. It's the best kind of investment, because that money comes with no strings attached. And many people in the business community are surprised to hear that. They think, oh, well, don't you take a piece of the intellectual property, or don't you take a piece of equity in that company? And no, we don't do that. It's completely free money. We have an active portfolio at any one time of around 1,800 companies, and that's across all the NIH institutes and centers. And many investors really view when they see a small business that has an SBIR award, they view that as independent validation of the science behind that project. Many angel investors and venture firms, they have trouble doing due diligence on novel biomedical projects, because by their nature, they're developed by scientists who are cutting edge in the field. So they view those awards as really validating the science, but increasingly they're viewing those awards as validating the commercial potential of those projects too. And the reason is that NIH is taking an increasing interest when we select those awards, and selecting awards that not only have interesting science, but also have a strong business potential behind them. So in Texas, in the last 2 years, we funded 98 companies in the small business portfolio with investments that total around $70 million. So it's a significant investment in the state of Texas and in the small businesses in Texas. And I'm going to walk through a few sample companies, and the reason I chose these companies is not just because they're Texas companies, but because these companies are also taking advantage of some of the additional support programs that our office manages and that are available at NIH, in addition to the funding that they receive from their small business awards. So Windmill is an Austin company. They're using NIH funding to develop a medical device for heart failure patients. And they've received about $6 million over the last 8 years. So a recurring theme here is these are significant amounts of money. If you progress through the different phases of the SBIR awards, many of these companies are receiving upwards of $10 million in non-dilutive funding in these early stages. So it's really significant investments. So one of the things that Windmill leveraged was the Phase 2B program. So many of you know that the SBIR program is a Phase 1 and Phase 2 program, but we actually also have a Phase 2B program, which helps later stage companies push further into commercialization. So Windmill received $3 million of additional SBIR funding to push further toward commercialization. They also took advantage of a regulatory assistance program that we developed together with FDA. And the goal of that program was to take early stage medical device companies and put them together, directly together with the FDA, to discuss their products and their path to commercialization at a pre-submission stage in a well-defined program. And so as part of that program, they actually refined their animal testing protocols before they froze their design, and they made changes to their product development path that they wouldn't have made without that program. And the other thing that happened with that program is they were pushed into the FDA's early feasibility program, which had many regulatory benefits that they would not have received if they hadn't have gone through that program. And Windmill also took advantage of the Commercialization Accelerator Program, which is a 9-month-long mentoring program that NIH has that's available to phase 2 companies to really help them strengthen the commercialization of their products. There are 2 tracks. There's a regulatory track and an advanced commercialization track. So the next company is Brevitest. They're actually a younger company. They're developing a point-of-care testing device for THC and opioids. And they've received about $1.7 million for various applications of their testing technology. They're based in Houston. And one of the things that Brevitest did is they took part in NIH's I-Corps program. So NIH sponsors our own I-Corps program for our phase 1 companies that really helps them validate through customer discovery the market potential of their application. And so Brevitest went through that program, and I think that it's fair to say that the focus on point-of-care testing for THC and opioids was really strengthened by their participation in that program, because they were able to go out and talk to the people who are really interested in the potential customers for that type of a diagnostic. That company is also supported by the Houston Technology Center and Texas A&M New Ventures competition, so they have tight connections and are leveraging a lot of Texas resources. Palmatech is really one of my favorite companies. They're developing an inhalable drug to prevent lung infections. They've received about $10 million from NIH over the years for preclinical development and even supporting their first-in-human testing, not just from the small business program, but from other later-stage translational research programs at NIH. And they've received pitch coaching and support to attend the Life Sciences Summit. And this is one of our initiatives that we run through our office. So we're helping these companies develop their pitches and be able to go and talk to investors, speak the language that an investor is used to hearing, and effectively try and receive follow-on funding. And any of you who have gone and pitched in front of an angel investing group or a venture firm understands the harrowing nature of that task. And we have a team of people who I'll talk to you about later that really prepare people to do that, and also we support them. We send them directly to those meetings to make those connections. Palmatech is interesting because not only have they received $10 million from us, but they've also received about $10 million in non-dilutive funding through the state of Texas and through various sources. So it's a theme that I want to emphasize, which is it's not just our money. We're trying to help these companies understand that what we're doing is just a drop in the bucket of what it takes to get from an idea to a product that's that's available to patients in the hospital, or a pill in the bottle. And so what we're trying to do is help them understand and facilitate their ability to make those connections and collect up the resources that are going to be necessary for them to be successful later. And see if the KCI folks are in the house. I also noticed when I was getting ready for the talk that there are 2 Texas companies that we fund currently who are interested in wound management. So there's Spectral MD in Dallas and Progenitech in Arlington. They're both funded by us to develop monitoring and wound healing applications. So I agree that wound healing is a very important area. And we have projects spanning all of the different areas of NIH's mission space. So all of these companies, in addition to those programs, have benefited from very specific business developing consulting with our internal staff in our office. And so I'm going to transition to explain to you how we have a team of internal experts. These people field phone calls and talk to people every day, but we built this team to really maximize our ability to help companies. On the left-hand side, in the upper left, Steve Flames, our investor in residence. He was on the board of the Angel Capital Association and the head of Tech Coast Angels for many years. And on the bottom left, Ethel Rubin, John Sullivan, and Steve Wolpe are full-time entrepreneurs in residence. So Ethel came to us from Medtronic. John Sullivan had a firm that was sold to a large CRO, and Steve Wolpe's worked in pharmaceuticals and regenerative medicine for many years with many small businesses. So they have really walked down this road. They have the battle wounds, and they can help people understand the things they need to understand to be successful. And then next to Steve is Salman. He's our ventures analyst, and he really helps us do business intelligence and competitive analysis for companies that they find really useful, because most, especially academic spin-out companies, don't have access to those resources. The third from the left on top, Gautam Prakash. So this is really interesting. So, and ties into the next talk that you'll hear. So Gautam is actually a full-time employee of the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, but he's on loan to us. And he's on loan to us full-time, and he assists us and allows us to help companies and academic innovators understand the intellectual property aspects of their inventions. So part of the goal there is to develop a relationship with your local tech transfer offices, but to help innovators understand how to communicate better with their tech transfer offices and to be a good customer and to really understand what they need to understand to work closely with their tech transfer offices. In the upper right, Chris Sassiella, full-time regulatory specialist in our office. So Chris has experience working at the FDA, but she's also been developing collaborations with the different centers, the drug center, the biologic center, the device center, and really helps us develop those partnerships with FDA. And in the lower right, Jen Madsen. Jen works for a company called MITRE, and MITRE is under contract with us to support our efforts, and they have a huge biomedical innovation team, but Jen is a specialist in reimbursement and insurance payment. So it really rounds out our team by allowing us to provide intellectual property support, regulatory support, and really from the earliest stages have people understand what they need to think about from the reimbursement perspective. Like, who's going to pay for this? How is it going to be paid for? What's the setting that it's going to be used in? Are there existing codes? These are the kinds of things that an academic innovator might never have thought about. But when it comes time to get that next level of funding from an angel investor or a venture investor, if you can't answer those questions, you're going to be in big trouble. So the final point is really that it really takes a village. NIH is trying to develop this approach that allows us to make partnerships with not only our sister agencies, but with outside investing firms and organizations that are going to help us to strengthen the innovations that we support and make successful handoffs to the private sector. And it's really emphasized by the examples that I gave, where many of these companies are benefiting not just from our support, but from funding and support from the local ecosystem in Texas. And whether that's money or help from the I-Corps program or J-Labs or the activities at the Texas Medical Center, or groups like Fanon that help build companies based in Houston that help build companies around successful academic technologies, promising academic technologies. That's really what we're trying to do. So let's work together, continue to work together to make this happen. And I hope that I've convinced you that NIH is not just all talk in this area. So here's my contact information. I'd be happy to answer a few questions or speak to anyone at a later time. Thank you very much. Any questions? I thought someone would ask me what's for lunch, but...
Hey, Matt, I'm sure many people have questions for you. But are you going to be here during lunch this afternoon?
Yes. Yeah.
That would be fantastic.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.